Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Attorneys Top 5 Lead Follow-Up Mistakes. My name is Sarah Shwani, and I'll be your moderator today. I work on the marketing team here at Martindale Avo, and I'm excited to be hosting this session. And I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters. We have Denny Newberry and Carl Jaeckel. Denny is the VP of Business Development at Captora and ICE, which is Intake Conversion Experts. And Carl is the managing partner of Jekyll Law and the founder of ClassAction.org. Okay, before I hand over to Denny, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. First, today's webinar replay will be provided to all attendees and registrants after the event. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have any questions for our presenters, please feel free to send it through the questions tab at the bottom of the control panel. We'll be answering questions at the end of the webinar. And lastly, if you'd like to contact us directly, you can reach us by calling 155-GO-INTAKE or emailing us at info@captora.com. So for questions, if you look at your panel, you can see the questions tab, which you toggle down and type in your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Denny Newberry. Denny, over to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Sarah, and certainly appreciate everyone's time today. I know people are busy, so happy Tuesday, and I hope that this will be a well-spent 30 to 45 minutes for everyone here. I personally am certainly passionate about today's topic, as I do really believe that this is an area that a lot of firms can improve to really sign up more cases without spending any additional marketing dollars. I'm also really excited, as Sarah introduced, Carl Jaeckel. He's a colleague, a good friend, and certainly an absolute expert in the marketplace. So I'm excited to have Carl with us today, and for him to take time out of his day to join us regarding this topic. And Sarah certainly did a wonderful job introducing Carl and providing some background there. But I just want to kind of back that up by saying Carl's really seen the good, the bad, and the ugly as it relates to how firms handle lead follow-up, along with myself, and how firms in general engage potential clients. So I hope we're able to provide some really solid information and some ways that you guys can fix those issues for your firm. Carl, before we really jump in, do you have anything that you want to kind of mention to set the stage here?
Danny, I just want to thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I just want to emphasize, I think, as you said in the beginning, how absolutely important this topic is. I've worked with and I continue to work with law firms all across the country, from small firms to the biggest firms you can imagine. And the seminal, I think the most important issue anybody can focus on is the intake, because you spend so much time, effort, and energy to drive people to your site, to your presence, and if you don't respond to them and properly handle the intake, all that other work that you've done is just for naught. So this is, an important topic, and one that's very near to my heart as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Carl. So, as you guys have probably been staring at this graph for a little bit, I'm just going to go and give you a heads up. You're going to see a lot of graphs and a lot of numbers today, but we'll be providing reasoning behind that. And I think there's a lot of value in looking at the reality of what firms are facing today as it relates to lead follow-up. So the first stat I kind of want to throw out in front of everyone is hopefully a good way to level set and to make sure everyone keeps their mind open to the reality of kind of where our marketplace is today with how firms in general handle lead follow-up. And as you can see from the data on this chart, only 7% of firms follow up with leads within 5 minutes. Now, you hear us talk about this golden 5-minute rule a good bit during the webinar today, and the reason behind that will become much more clear later on as we go through these different kind of processes with intake and lead follow-up. But I believe that number is really important to remember. Now, the obvious part of this graph that jumps out is that over half of the firms don't even contact a lead with even 5 days, or do not contact a lead at all. And I think a lot of people hearing that on the webinar probably immediately believe that's definitely not them. Like, why in the world will we not contact a lead? But this absolutely is going on more than you probably realize. And also, I think, an excuse that I commonly hear related to that, whether it be not contacting a lead or not contacting them immediately, is that, you're looking at the information from a chat lead or a web lead, and you say, oh, it isn't a valid case, or that my staff handles lead follow-up, so I'm sure they had a good reason. And as there may be certainly some validity to that comment, we will soon talk about how both of those, for lack of a better term, excuses, even if they are true, have future ramifications on how well your firm can certainly follow up and sign clients moving forward. So with that said, I mentioned the statistics. So here's another one that we're gonna look at. And as it relates to lead follow up, I think that the first mistake, as we kind of have 5 mistakes that we're going to review, the first one we're going to start with is how quickly, or in a lot of cases slowly, in most cases, your initial reach out to a potential client can mean to your really ability to convert them into a signed client. So this is a Harvard Business Review that shows if you wait longer than 5 minutes, going back to that golden rule, the 5-minute rule, if you wait longer than 5 minutes to contact a potential client, your actual odds of getting a hold of them and qualifying them drop by 400%. So that's how large that number is, and you can quantify that in your own practice in terms of if you get 5 leads a week or 500. But 400% is a pretty large decrease in your chances of getting hold of them. Now, whether you're like I mentioned, a smaller firm that gets a handful of leads or a nationwide practice with thousands, contacting that lead within the first 5 minutes should certainly take priority over pretty much anything else going on in your practice at that given time, since your ability to retain that given client starts right here, starts with that connecting with the potential client immediately. And as we all hear, assumptions are dangerous. I say that because whether attorneys like to admit it or not, I see too many firms assume that just because a claimant reached out to your firm, they only want to talk to you and sign with you. And even if sometimes if you don't want to admit it, I think that subconsciously enters our head. And I really think a more accurate and safe assumption is to make that if a claimant has reached out to your firm, especially via the web, they have also reached out to at least 2 other firms. So being able to jump on that lead immediately puts you in the the starting position, so to speak, on being able to plant that seed for your ability to help them as a law firm and being able to qualify them and sign them as a client. So Carl, I know.
Denny,
Yep, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, Denny, absolutely. I apologize. You're right on the money there. I mean, when people are filling out those forms, it's a beauty contest. They're filling out multiple forms. I've been involved in marketing campaigns with law firms where they're running multiple properties, some branded it's their name, some not branded in their name. And what I've seen is the exact same client will go to one site, at 1 o'clock and fill out the form. They're on the next site filling out the form at 1:05. They're on the next site filling out the form at 1:15. So they're shopping to 3 different places. And if you do not get to that client immediately, you're going to lose that client. I've also worked with firms where, there's 2 or 3 firms working together, and I've seen the same person go to each firm, and the firm that does, that waits does not ever get into the mix and never has a chance of signing that client. The firm that jumps on it first is the one that gets the client. And many times, by not jumping on it first, I've seen people lose very, very valuable cases because they didn't make the calls quickly enough.
Yeah, great point, Carl. And actually, this is a kind of a subject we'll get into more in detail later. But to that particular point, when you talk about how firms don't even enter the mix or even get into the game of being able to sign a client, a lot of times firms, when they're looking at their conversion numbers, and I'm talking to groups about their conversion numbers, those leads they don't even include in those numbers because either whether it be due to complete ignorance on the fact of how many leads they're actually getting that they just never got a hold of, or they don't enter them in just because they want their numbers to look better. I really believe that the majority of firms I've talked to just don't even kind of put that into their analytics, and the classic "you don't know what you don't know" certainly enters the mix when you're not even attempting to reach these potential clients immediately.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So let's transition into something here I certainly want to discuss, and this is really something that comes up a lot with me when I'm on a presentation at Captora with a lot of firms, and we're talking about our automated follow-up tool. People ask a lot of times, well, how do we not just piss off the potential client by contacting them too much? And my answer always is, I wouldn't really worry about that. They need to tell you as a firm that they're not interested in your services. And this chart here proves that. So you'll see that this data provided by Martin Delavo across multiple clients shows very clearly that, believing that you're upsetting the client, the opposite is actually true as it relates to how consumers look at potential firms in a lot of cases. So the top result here corresponds with the earlier chart on how slow response relates directly to your inability to reach a potential client. And your claimants, your potential clients are actually seeing that daily, as you can see here. And not only does it really give other firms the ability to contact them first, it also sets a very dangerous precedent in your potential client's mind that you're just slow to respond with everything that you might do for them in the future. That's the first perception that they have when they're reaching out. And even if they do end up weighing the option of going with your firm and you are able to connect with them, kind of in the back of their mind, they're like, well, they didn't get back to me right away. It took a day. So is it always going to take longer than 24 hours to hear back from them? So if you take really whether a claimant has a real case or not out of the equation, which you honestly really don't know until you talk to them, pretty much every person who is pursuing a case actually wants to retain a law firm services. So with that in mind, the alternative of following up too much is that they just end up signing with another firm. And Carl gave that example that I know has happened 1,000 times over earlier. And really, even if that potential client doesn't have a case, your competition is still able to get in touch with them and is first able to plant that seed of marketing for how they can help them and their family and friends in the future. So if you tell them, you have a process to follow up and you're able to efficiently let them know in a very sympathetic way that you're unable to help them, they always know, hey, you know what? At least that firm was quick to respond and let me know, the legal reasons why they're unable to help me. So in the future, I'm able to call them again and feel comfortable with that. So, even on your chats or web leads that come in that you feel are not valid cases, there's still value in your business to connect with them right away and being able to speak to them about their potential case, whether it actually ends up being a case for you or not. So another chart here, which is from the Harvard Business Review, and you'll see a little bit of a theme here. I like Harvard charts because Harvard seems to get people's attention when you're looking at data from those studies. And so this is actually across multiple industries, and you can see the optimal number of attempts. And by the way, obviously, as the slide says, we're getting into mistake number 2, which is the fear of over communication that firms have. So you can see the optimal number of attempts you should make before giving up on a lead is at least 6. So after 6 attempts, your conversion rate on that lead starts to plateau and even dip a bit. So it's probably better to move on, but the minimum should be at least 6. I know Sarah mentioned earlier in introducing me that we also have another business side as a call center, and the average attempts it takes for us to reach a potential client that contacted the firm, usually electronically, certainly varies depending on practice area and the type of lead source, but on average it hovers around 3. It's right under 3, but it's close to 3 attempts. And that's really just the reality of the culture that we live in today. People just do not answer the phone on the first attempt. They just really don't. I know in a lot of cases, even being in a business setting, I'm unable to do that. So you have to continue to follow up with these potential clients. And I think another factor that goes into this for your potential clients that I don't think enough firms take into account is that we as human beings just have, and excuse my language, we just have a lot of shit going on in our life. So, as we go throughout our day, and especially as it relates to the need to hire an attorney, regardless of your area of practice, if I personally am someone who is in need of hiring an attorney, odds are I'm dealing with 100 other things related to that same need, whether I was in a car accident or I need an attorney to defend me in a criminal case, or I need to file bankruptcy, or I'm going through a divorce. You might have to, call me 3 or 4 times to catch me at a good time to really kind of take the time out of my day to talk about these details and to move forward with the case. So don't be afraid of reaching out to your, to your leads multiple times. So, Carl, back, I want to wrap you into this again. So I know in your experience for, the firms that you work with that actually do make multiple attempts, and you can speak to how many that is versus not, but how often are they kind of staggering those attempts that you see? And the ones that are, do you see better results than the ones who don't?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, the most successful firms that I work with are the ones that not only follow up immediately, but are really extremely persistent in their pursuit of the client. What we like to say is sales and marketing. Your marketing is what drives the people to this site so that they communicate with you, but your outbound attempt to reach them, that is sales. And the firms that have that mentality, that recognize that they have to reach out and pursue them and really go after the client, are the ones that succeed. And what we see really in terms of attempts, it's going to depend on the type of case and the type of client that the firm is going after. It's not one size fits all. I mean, if it's a very significant single event MVA that the client's trying to get you, you're just going to keep calling that. If you're trying to get a class rep and one of 4 or 5 will do, that will kind of guide what you do. But what we see over and over again is that the culture of reaching out and understanding that people want to be reached out, they would not have filled out that form. They would not have asked you, to contact them if they did not want to be contacted. And I have seen time and time again where we'll finally get in touch with someone and they're very thankful. Thanks for keep call. Thank you for continuing to try and get me. I'm sorry I didn't pick up right away. To Denny's point, I was busy. I had some things going on, but it shows them that you're interested. And just the other point is, the attempts we those vary based upon case type, and then also you have to look at the type of case and what's going on, and make sure that you stagger when you call them and how you try and reach out to them. You don't want to call them every day at 11 o'clock in the morning. And I think you're going to talk about that as well. But that's also very important to understand.
Yeah, exactly, Carl. That transitions nicely into something we'll talk about that relates to this in a minute. But before we get to that, I do want to bring in some real data related to what we just talked about as well from the Martin Del Avo data here that we have across multiple firms. So, based on everything we discussed, at least on the mistake number two, I have some good and bad news for everyone on the call today. As you can see, most firms contact potential clients 2 to 3 times and then give up on the lead with, very few actually reaching out to that 6 or more times that we talked about. Now, I mentioned the good and bad news, and my mom always taught me to start with the bad news. So the bad news is, of course, that most of you, most people on this call, most firms in the market fall into that 2 and 3 attempt. The good news is, so do your competitors. So the numerous follow-up attempts needed to reach that potential client does bring me to something I want to talk about quickly that we don't really have a specific slide for, but I do think it's important. So if possible, which should be most of you, but if possible, your firm should really look to dedicate a staff member or a department, if you're large enough, for the specific following up on leads, that responsibility. And in my experience, attorneys and legal staff are typically not great at following up with potential clients, and I completely understand why. They have a good excuse. So your day as a legal staff member within a firm is typically prioritized by your current caseload. And whether people really like to admit it or not, your ability to quickly call a new lead or to make that fifth or sixth or seventh attempt to reach out to a lead can be hindered by those other priorities in your day. Not only that, it really takes a completely different mentality, and this is to use an old sales phrase, to smile and dial, which is essentially what you're doing. Yes, that person, reached out to you or is looking for legal services, but at the end of the day, it's a sales call. You're a sales call for your law firm to sell your service to that potential client. So, most people within a firm can successfully certainly take a direct phone call from a potential client and go through an intake, but that same person isn't necessarily well equipped to jump on a lead right away and call them for the fourth time, which is what's really needed, as we've talked about leading up to this, to convert them into a client in a lot of cases. And I just wanted to mention that before we move on, because I really believe that too many firms try to have their legal staff wear way too many hats. And the thing that actually falls by the wayside most times is this follow-up process, which has enormous ramifications on your ability to scale your firm. So, Carl, I know you've had a lot of experience with this, with different groups and the way they handle it. And, even you actually as a practicing attorney, do you mind sharing some experience you have on the dedicated intake staff side?
Yeah, I would love to. I wish I didn't have horror stories to tell you, but I do. Whenever I work with a firm or we're looking at new cases, one of the first things I ask is, if they say that they have intake personnel, I really drill into that. Okay, who is that person? What does that person do? If that person's sitting at the front desk answering calls, handing out mail, making copies, and then making calls in between, that person's really not doing intake. To Denny's point, if that person's a paralegal that's making calls in between, that person is not doing intake. And I think it also kind of relates back to one of the earlier slides when I think Denny said you might be lying to yourself in terms of response time. I think many times firms are lying to themselves in terms of who is doing really qualified intake. And many law firms and lawyers will say, well, we've assigned it to Joe or we've assigned it to Mary. And then they think, okay, somebody is on it. But just because you've given that responsibility to someone does not mean that it is being handled properly. And, the person that is doing this, to do it, whether it's a small number or to do it at scale, has to be dedicated and has to be focused. Because what comes with these this type of an intake scenario is, you're making calls, you're reaching out, people are calling you back, you have to follow up on calls. So it's not as simple as I have 10 phone calls to make today. That 10 phone calls could turn into 15, 20, 30 phone calls. One of those clicks in and you're doing an intake. Now you've got to work through that. So you really, I can't tell you how important it is to have somebody that really does nothing but make outbound phone calls and respond to the people when they dial back in, and just lives, eats, and breathes that. And on top of that, and then I'll wrap up here, that also provides continuity. If you have a person or two people that are in that zone of trying to bring these clients in, they know what's going on, they get a feel for it, they get into a rhythm, and they become much more productive. And then you start to see your ability to close and bring clients into the firm start to grow up, start to ratchet up exponentially.
Yeah, it's funny, Carl. As you were talking, I was actually thinking, because I've been in somewhat of a position of sales all my life, and in most other industries, salespeople are some of the highest paid people within a company. And for, I'm biased, but for good reason. I mean, that's where it starts. That's where you build a business. And I don't want to lose half our audience by every attorney clicking out of the webinar by saying that your intake staff should make more than you. But you probably should put more effort in keeping good people and finding the right people for that position, because at the end of the day, you can't settle a litigated case you don't have. And that's how important it is.
Yeah.
All right. So mistake number 3, relying just on phone calls to reach potential clients, or even emails for that matter. So again, this data is collected by the Martin DeLavo client base, and it really serves multiple purposes. Just as an aside, it kind of gives you guys a general idea on how potential clients prefer to reach you, which transitions nicely into how those same consumers really probably prefer to be contacted back. And not using all forms of communication in certainly today's age of technology is really an enormous mistake. And we can really look across technology just in general and know that the use of emails, and especially text messages as we move forward in today's age, are going to be really more of the norm for how people prefer to communicate. And that's no different in the legal industry. So your firm really needs to understand the nuances of this kind of technology space and utilize it appropriately, or you'll absolutely be losing cases. And we don't have the trend on this chart, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that the use of text specifically is just going to increase when you're looking at these numbers. And speaking of text, I want to focus on this for a minute and take it a step further and really just focus on the importance of leveraging text messaging as part of your follow-up process. And I want to ask everyone on the webinar just to do something real quick and just to take a look at your smartphone and just see how many unread text messages you have versus unread emails. I'll give everybody a brief second to just kind of glance at your phone and just kind of keep that number in mind. And I'd be willing to bet that 99% of you, let's call it 95% of you have more unread emails than you do unread text. And this isn't like some attempt for me to perform a magic trick on a webinar. It's just the reality of the way that we're built today as a society. And here are some more numbers you see here on this, not a chart, but just kind of an infographic from a study from last year that show how much more effective text messaging is over email. So most firms I talk today have kind of gone down the path of leveraging some type of email communication when following up with leads, and whether that's automated or manual, they're doing something in the way of email. But if you're one that's text messaging today, congratulations, because believe it or not, most firms are absolutely not leveraging text messaging and have kind of jumped on that bandwagon. And I believe this is extremely detrimental in today's market. And the fact that you see here 98% of text messages are open versus 22% of emails shows how much more effective text messaging communication is when reaching someone. And earlier when I was looking at this number, just a side note here, if you're part of the 2% that's not opening your text messages, you need help. You're a monster. I don't know who you are. That's really weird to me. But 98% is almost the entirety. So certainly kind of keep that number in mind. And I know for me personally, I can't think of one text message that I haven't opened, simply because I just don't like the red number showing on my phone as unread text messages. I couldn't go to sleep at night if I knew that number was there. Emails, hey, it's okay. I can respond tomorrow sometime to those. Text messages, no way. So I have to open those up immediately. And then, emails, of course, can be filtered by junk folders. So the last kind of stat I want to look at here as well is the open rate. So you can see a 3-minute average for text messages versus 384 minutes for emails can certainly make a difference when connecting with a potential client. So again, going back to the first mistake, if you are a firm who's actually making that 5 minute rule, if you're calling within 5 minutes, but you're not following up with a text message, and another firm calls within 15 minutes, as we stated between that slide and this slide, people don't always answer the phone. They're not listening to voicemails right away, but they are, as you can see here, looking at text messages. So that needs to be coupled with that effort. And, again, even if a potential client does end up opening an email, it most likely is going to take them much longer to respond, as you can see here. And again, for me, it's just ingrained in my mentality personally that when I get a text message, I need to respond to that versus an email that can sometimes wait. And given this information, I certainly think it's extremely important to implement text messaging as part of your process. The excuse I hear a lot of, my client base, my practice area, they don't really have smartphones, so they don't really use text messaging, I think is a very dangerous excuse, especially in today's age. And let's just say that 10% of your potential clients have the ability to receive text messages, which, by the way, is an extremely low and an accurate number, but let's just call it 10%. Even if you can connect with just that 10%, it can make a huge difference with your conversion of not only connecting with that claimant, but then, of course, signing them up as well. And Carl, on this subject, I know as you, as an attorney and obviously a human being, as someone that uses text messaging in your business and your personal life, what have you seen with your clients on how, text messaging can make a difference for their firm?
I'll tell you the thing that stands out the most to me in terms of text messaging is I like to have that as an option to tell the potential client that this is an okay way for us to communicate. So what we like to do and what I've seen a lot of firms that I work with do is in the initial outreach, whether it's an email response to a web form, whether it's a voicemail being left when we're smiling and dialing, we always, and I would stress this to you, you always want to give that person that you're reaching out to the ability to reach back to you via text message. So even if your people are smiling, dying, hi, this is Carl Jaeckel, I'm calling from blah, blah, blah. You sent in a form, please give me a buzz back. If it's easier for you to text, you can feel free to text me and you give them the ability to reach out to you that way. We see, so many times that a voicemail will come back. The response will come back via text message. Then an email will come out, will be sent out, and the response will come back via text message, and a whole dialogue and a discussion will ensue, and much of it, until you absolutely have to get on the phone for some reason, much of it goes back and forth by text. To Denny's point earlier, people are just comfortable with text. It's a new, equally appropriate way to communicate and speak with people, and I think if you don't recognize that and you are not open to that, you're going to cut yourself off to a lot of people.
Absolutely. And also it lets the claimant know that you're up to date on technology, which, believe it or not, is really important to some people to know that you're utilizing that. So I know we're running a little tight on our goal to stay within the kind of 30 to 45-minute mark. So mistake number 4 and 5, I'm just going to go and give everyone a heads up. We're going to move through pretty quickly to get to Q&A. So, and we kind of touched on mistake number 4 earlier anyways, but this is really trying to focus on making attempts at different times of the day, or different days even. So again, another Harvard Business Review. I do love these charts. But this isn't probably all that surprising to everyone here, but trying to reach someone prior to 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. or even on the weekend can be extremely effective. If someone can't answer the phone to get back to you at 10:30 a.m. on a Monday because they're sitting at work, they probably can't do it on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So really try to track when you are making these attempts and stagger them at different times as much as possible. And on top of this, I would really highly recommend making your follow-up attempts after the initial reach out, again, early in the day and afternoon, but really attempting to do it during the weekend. And this goes back to something we talked about earlier with the dedicated staff member. You as an attorney, you may have the best intention in mind, but you also have a family life, you also have other responsibilities, and it becomes really difficult for you to keep yourself accountable to do these things. If you have someone whose job responsibility is to do this and they're paid appropriately to do so, then you'll see a huge result change in your ability to connect with these leads. So just, wanted to kind of get through that quickly. We have a lot of other things and stats to talk about here, but at the end of the day, if you know that these attempts are being made at the same time of day, try to stagger that and try to track that because it will make a big difference for you. So moving on to mistake number 5 is if you're doing everything leading up to this point, but you're not tracking your results, then I wouldn't say it's a waste, but you're not able to analyze and make changes based on that as well. So it's really impossible for you to know what is and isn't working and make those changes. So this report here is pulled directly from Captora, but whether you're using our system or not, it is critical that you know when leads are coming in and on average how quickly you're making that first initial call and how many overall attempts your staff is making after that. And this report shows, specifically when a lead hits the system, how many attempts have been made, and then when those attempts were made and by which staff member in the firm they were made by. So I can look at this and as a business owner know how often leads are being contacted, how often we're exhausting efforts with that sixth attempt we talked about versus letting them just sit in the system. And then the other key area here is to make sure you're actually doing something with this data. I see way too many attorneys spend half their day looking at non-actionable reports. And as a business owner myself, I certainly understand the feel-good report, quote unquote, but you really need to make sure you have information in front of you that actually gives you the ability to make changes within your own organization that actually have an impact on your business. So, Carl, I think this one's probably one you have a lot to say about because I know you rely on this information when you're working with firms to be able to better tailor their marketing efforts. Now, Martin Delavo as a whole, we've had a ton of conversations about, man, it would be great if we had this information for firm to really drive more traffic to them and be able to handle and kind of understand the volume they can handle. But in your experience, kind of how many firms are tracking this data and when they are, what kind of difference can that not only make to them, but your marketing capability to drive more leads to them?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. To your point, it's mission critical. You need actionable data so you understand what's going on the ground, what your people are doing, how they're doing it, and you need a system. I mean, we use Captora. I'm a big fan of Captora, but it doesn't matter whether it's Captora or whether it's something else. You need a system that is just going to track what people are doing, their attempts, when they're made, how often they're made, in order to improve this process. If you have to look at it kind of as a continuum. If you don't know what's going on and what's working, what's not working, you can't make improvements and you can't make adjustments. And it amazes me in today's market how many firms don't have anything that even comes close to resembling analytics. So the idea of trying to look at their processes and figure out what they're doing and how to make changes to their marketing and some of the other things they're doing, just it's just really amazing to me when I look at that and I see what's going on. So this is very, very critical. You need to have that actionable data and you need to look at it and then adjust based upon what it's telling you.
Thanks, Carl. So we'll wrap up here, guys, and I think a pretty quick run through on what we believe is the top 5 mistakes. We'll give you the Reader's Digest version here. So follow up with your leads immediately at least within 5 minutes. Try and contact them at least 6 times before giving up. Utilize every method of communication available, especially text messaging to reach that person, and try to contact them at different times of the day and really try to do it early in the morning or late in the afternoon or even on the weekend if possible. And as we just talked about and as Carl touched on, make sure you're tracking this data to make those appropriate changes. And there's of course a ton of other areas to talk about, but I really believe, and I think I speak for everyone on the phone, that we really believe that if these 5 things your firm can specifically focus on, make those small improvements, you should really see a drastic increase in your ability to connect with potential clients. And really, that's at the end of the day, signing them up, connecting with them, qualifying, increasing sign up is the end goal for each firm as they're looking to scale their business. And I just very quickly wanted to share with everyone one of my personal favorite quotes from Albert Einstein, because we didn't really just want to educate everyone today. We truly want to empower the marketplace and our market. I think as law firms are able to enhance their ability to set a better example and the right perception to potential client, it really helps everyone in the marketplace. So instead of really trying to outspend your problem by throwing more money at resources or marketing, first look internally and see what extra juice out of the orange, for lack of a better term, you can squeeze out of what you already have sitting right in front of you and being able to capitalize on your efforts that you currently have going on. Before we move to Q&A, I just want to, again, personally thank everyone for the time today. I also want to, again, Carl, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know how busy you are with travel and working with your clients. So, truly want to thank you. I hope, listen not only to me coming from the Captoris perspective, but the true expert here, Carl, being on the line was extremely helpful for everyone. So, Carl, before we move to Q&A, do you have anything you want to mention before we finish up?
No, I want to say thank you again, and I think that summary that you put there in terms of those mistakes that we talked about are really important. I think if people focus on those and understand them and really dive in and try and make improvements, they will see results. I've worked many times with firms where we generate tens of thousands of leads, and I can see a firm that takes 100 leads and just hits the ball out of the park, and another firm you could send 1,000 leads to, and they just can't seem to get it going. So this really is, I think, the core, or really one of the most important elements of growing your practice and scaling your practice. So thank you, Denny, for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'm going to pass it over to Sarah to see what questions we have. And I'm sure I can speak again directly for everyone here by saying that not only, Captora, Carl Services, but Martindale Avo as a whole, between Martindale, Hubble, Nolo, Avo, Total Attorneys, can certainly drive more business to you guys. And then you couple that with Engage Chat and Captora to help actually convert those leads. And again, for Carl specifically, if you guys are a mass tort or class action firm or looking to get any of those services, Carl's your go-to there. But with that being said, Sarah, to see what kind of questions we have here.
Yeah, thank you both. That was a very informative webinar. We'll try and get through as many questions that we can. The first question we have is, how do you suggest finding the right person to handle your incoming leads? This goes to both of you.
I'll take this first.
Sure.
Denny, if I can, I think the most important thing you want to do in terms of finding the right person is you need to find the person that's going to be an ambassador on behalf of your law firm, someone that is comfortable talking on the phone, someone that is articulate, someone that is compassionate, someone that can understand, kind of what the issues are and can work quickly and effectively, but at the same time, show attention to the person that's calling, because there's a fine line between rushing the person off the phone and staying on the phone for an hour and a half for something that should take 20 minutes. So I think you want to find the person with the right personality that's comfortable, and once you get that person up and running, they understand you and they understand your firm and they understand your case types, that person becomes invaluable.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, I think there's no reason not to treat that role as a sales position role. And remember, this person is the very first perception that a potential client's going to have of your firm. So just because someone is extremely personable on, face to face doesn't mean they're the right person over the phone. So this could be two very different resources. But I echo what Carl said there.
Okay, thank you. And our next question is, if everyone's on the phone or otherwise engaged, how do you respond to a lead within 5 minutes?
So, Carl, I'll jump in here. I think there's a couple of options, and I believe that there's no reason not to have both, or even multitude of options here. But I think even if you have a dedicated staff focusing their time on this responsibility, the reality is, of course, that leads sometimes come in waves, and we certainly get that. With that being said, I still believe there's value in having a specific person that you would call a tier 2 staff. I see way too many firms, they'll have a dedicated person, and after that, it's the wild, wild west. And we go back to that analytics tracking. If you're tracking your analytics and you know that over half the time, or even say 40% of the time, that first person isn't able to handle those leads coming in within 5 minutes, it most likely makes sense to hire a second dedicated person. It's that important to your practice. So, with the ability to be able to track that information, to have that dedicated person, I think that's extremely important. I also, just a side note here, just only because I know Captora does it, but just find a way to do this. There's no reason you shouldn't have the ability, especially for electronic leads coming in, for you to be able to automatically send out a note via email and text that says something like, "Thank you very much for contacting our firm. We will be calling you from X number," whatever your phone number you're going to be calling out on, "to discuss your potential case." And that message alone does two things. It checks the box that you've at least reached out to them in some way within that 5-minute mark. And it also increases your connection rate on that very first call, because now the potential client recognizes that phone number from the text message when you call them, and they're more likely to pick up to discuss their case with you.
Okay, thank you. And our next question is there a way to respond by text without using your team's personal cell phones? Denny?
Yeah, so I hate to keep tooting our horn here, but just because it's what I know, I mean, Captora certainly allows that. But to be fair, there are multiple solutions out there, guys, whether it be an intake software or texting solution by itself, through like a Twilio or a ZipWhip or systems I've seen. But you absolutely should, do everything in your power to get away from a personal cell phone and take that responsibility out of out of that, hands of that staff member to be able to do that. There's some liability issues there anyway if it's not yourself. So I would find a way or a solution to be able to not only utilize a solution outside of your personal cell phone, but also automate that process as well.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question is for both of you. Do you suggest trying to have one system that does everything or have different systems that focus on specific needs of the firm? We can start with Carl.
I think you need a dichotomy. You need specialized tools for specific things, and I think an intake system that does all of the things we've been talking about for the last half hour is mission critical, and it is very different from a case management system. They function differently. They have different purposes, and I think the ability to have that tool for your intake people that works for them, that gives them all the different tools that they need to really close down the client, and then give you information in terms of what's going on is absolutely essential. So I think you need a very focused and specialized system for intake.
Yeah, Carl. I mean, so I come from a unique perspective on this. Before I co-founded Captora with a couple of my business partners here, we all actually came from the case management space, which is really what we're talking about in a lot of cases here. And if I owned a firm today, if I started a firm today, I absolutely would value the idea of having everything in one system. I totally get that. However, with that being said, you also have to be okay with settling for C plus or B minus functionality and benefits in certain areas of your practice by doing that. And in my experience, the biggest missing factor from, kind of the quote unquote all in one systems is this front end lead management aspect. I think everyone out there, case management, documents, what have you, are going to say they have an intake component. But just from 30 minutes today, as you guys can see, there's a lot of nuances there with intake. And I think there's a real reason why essentially every other industry outside of legal actually prefers, the majority of businesses have best of breed solutions for their different business needs, because they understand and know that systems speaking to each other through integrations is definitely a worthwhile trade-off for their A plus functionality for each part of their business. It's really no different than me calling a criminal defense attorney that represented me in the past. And by the way, I'm using that as an example. I haven't ever had a need for a criminal defense attorney, but it's no different than me calling that same attorney and asking them to represent me in my auto accident case or to handle my divorce or bankruptcy. That's not their core competency. And software applications and the way that development goes behind that and support and just education understanding that is really no different. So I don't mean for every firm, but I do think there's probably the majority over the minority of groups would be much more beneficial to them to look at best of breed applications that are out there for individual needs of their practice.
Hey, Denny, I just want to follow up on that, not to beat a dead horse, but I think it's really important because, we talked earlier about having a dedicated person making phone calls, and that's their function. The person that is, you don't have your paralegal and your litigation support people, running your intake department. You have intake people running that, just like you don't have your intake people in your case management system looking through pleadings. They're just completely separate functions. And the fact that a client happens to originate in the intake system and then is worked on once they become a client in the case management system, that's the only kind of connection, if you will. And it's not the idea of trying to lump everything in together, to have one gadget, that does everything. Just I've seen it time and time again. It's just not. It just doesn't work as efficiently and effectively as having one focused system that does one thing and does it really, really well.
And it's interesting that you mention, your intake staff, because I'm getting a lot of questions about intake staff with people wanting to know how do you hire them. Obviously, I'm getting some questions about how much they should earn, but that I think maybe is a bit beyond what the webinar was going to talk about. But can you talk a bit more about intake staff and maybe finding them and what kind of skills they should have?
Yeah, Carl, I know you'll have some comments here. I'll jump in real quick.
You start with this one. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so a few things there as it relates to kind of the interview process. I wouldn't treat it any different than hiring a good salesperson. First off, and this may sound weird to say, but I've come into this a lot where you need to make sure the person can talk on the phone and type at the same time. And I've seen too many people struggle with that, where they're extremely inefficient because they've come from a world where they're just writing things down, and then they're going back into a database. It doesn't have to be Captora. Just most firms have some type of Excel sheet, database, case management, whatever, where they're then putting their phone on do not disturb and they're going and entering all that information. And I'm sorry if you're someone on the phone that's doing that, but you really need to learn the skill of being able to talk and type so you can move right on to the next call. And and I kind of would treat the interview process for an intake person the opposite that I would treat most other roles, where I would focus more heavily on the phone interview. Meet them face to face, certainly. I mean, make sure they're a real person and that they say who they say they are. But I would focus a heavy interview process on the phone because that's going to be their job. They need to be able to coherently speak, provide sympathy, and be able to do that all over the phone. And then lastly, as it relates to pay, you're right, Sarah. I don't want to get into specifics because someone who lives in a certain rural area versus someone who lives in Manhattan need to be paid completely different. However, I will say that you need to look at what you're paying that person and really understand the value they bring to your business versus the age old, hey, this is a quote unquote call center person that I can pay minimum wage to, because you're going to lose good people and they're going to treat their job as they're being paid. And I don't think there's anything wrong with bonusing those people. I wouldn't say, I mean, we have seen firms do it, bonus people on signups. There's some gray area there, which I completely understand, but you can bonus them on work effort. If you have a system you're tracking how many attempts they're making, what their overall just conversion rate is. So there's ways of incentivizing these people to jump on leads immediately and qualify and sign up cases that's completely ethical. Carl, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, actually, I think it's funny because I just hired somebody new that started a couple of days ago, and what I've seen in the past is there is a lot of people out there from all different walks of life that really enjoy phone work. They like customer service, they like sales, they like support, they like being in an environment, and there's also a lot of really bad call center jobs out there that people become just demoralized with, and I always look when we start to interview people, I see people that have had different customer service and call center experiences where they've stayed there for a while, and many times, and one of the best people we've ever had was at a job, she's terrific, but they just weren't treating her right, and they weren't really understanding that she was something more than just somebody that was a drone on a phone. And so when you look at people that have experience in that field, when they're personable, when they're articulate, when they do well on the phone, that's the person you want to really make sure that you try and hire. And those people are out there. You have to look for them. They are out there, and they can be found.
Okay, thank you for that. I have two more questions, and I think we will wrap up the Q&A. Denny, you spoke about text messaging, and I have a question here about would you suggest using WhatsApp for follow-up?
So I am familiar with WhatsApp by name. My general comment to that is two things. I would just make sure that if you're, which you should, if you're getting into the world of text messaging for follow-up, I would make sure, one, it has a very easy way to automate that process, and two, it follows TCPA, legal laws on unsubscribe. So I know with the tool we use, you can type stop, STOP, and any manual text or any any automated text does not get delivered to that phone. So I'm sorry I can't answer the question directly, as I'm not familiar with the nuances of WhatsApp. But at the end of the day, I think any service that you find that you're comfortable with that can automate the process and allows the potential client to unsubscribe. And also, I guess the third thing I'll mention is just make sure you're able to quickly get notified and can track responses. Because I do see a lot of groups actually automate text, but a person responds, they have no clue. They have no way of monitoring that, which is a problem in itself. It actually makes you look worse. So those are the three things I would look at when finding a tool to help automate the text messaging process.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, I have several questions about frequency, and both of you can answer this. So the question the questions I'm getting is, how often should you make contact? Is it every day, twice a day, every other day? Is there like a perfect number of times?
Carl, I know you kind of made comment about this
Yeah.
regarding different practice areas. I'll let you jump in on this.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's, to Denny's point, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's a function of the type of marketing you're doing and the type of potential client you're going after. If this is a mesothelioma case, asbestos case, you're going to call constantly day and night until you get that person, and you're going to go after them. If it's a class case, I think was the answer I used before, and you're trying to get, you need 4 or 5 class reps from a specific state, and you've got all these inquiries, you can start moving through, a whole group of people that you have until you find one that you want. So I think it's sort of like, I guess scarcity would be, the way to look at it. If it's a single event case, it's a high value case, you're going to want more frequency, more often. If it's a case where there's multiple people out there that would fill the bill in terms of like a class rep or something like that, then you don't have to go after each one as aggressively, although you may go after the group just as aggressively. So I think you really just have to look at the type of person that's made the initial inquiry, the case type that's involved, the service that you're asking you for, and then kind of judge appropriately and just gauge it based upon what they're looking for.
Yeah, Carl, it's right. And it's a general rule of thumb. It's kind of an actionable answer I'll give to that is that I try to tell firms and educate firms that if you don't really know where to start, we talk about all the stats we had today on the 5-minute rule, the 6 attempts. I would definitely make that first attempt within 5 minutes. I would make 2 attempts within 24 hours, 3 attempts within 48 hours, and your first 6 attempts should be made within 5 days. That may sound aggressive to a lot of people, but we saw the stats earlier that what the trade-off is for not doing that. And if you find that in your particular practice area or in your demographic or even your geographic area, that becomes a little much or maybe not enough, then you can always tailor that. But if you have nowhere to start, that's where I would start. 2 within 24 hours, 3 within 48, and 6 within 5.
Okay, thank you both. Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation today. And as I'd mentioned to all those attending, we will be emailing out a replay of the webinar to you next week.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.